Before the world ever danced to the infectious beat of Dancing Queen or wept quietly to the melancholy of The Winner Takes It All, Benny Andersson was already busy laying the invisible foundation of what would become one of pop music's most enduring legacies. But the story he is only now telling isn't about disco balls or sequins. It is about exhaustion, regret, fractured love, and the painful silence that followed the applause. After decades of speculation, Benny has finally spoken, and his truth is deeper, sadder, and more revealing than anyone could have expected. Benny Andersson was born on December 16, 1946, in the Vasastan district of Stockholm, into a working-class household where music was not a career path but a cherished family tradition. His father, a civil engineer, and his grandfather, a self-taught musician, introduced young Benny to the accordion when he was just 6 years old. That humble instrument unlocked a fascination with melody and harmony that would never leave him. Unlike many of his peers who dreamed of stardom and adulation, Benny was never driven by a desire to be seen. He was far more interested in understanding how music actually worked, its inner mechanics, its emotional logic, its invisible architecture. From the mathematical precision of Bach to the earthy storytelling embedded in Swedish folk songs, Benny taught himself piano entirely by ear and could replicate melodies after hearing them just once or twice. By the age of 10, he was already performing at family gatherings and school concerts, known not for showmanship but for his innate sensitivity to tone and emotion. In 1964, at just 18 years old, he joined the Hep Stars, a Swedish rock band that had earned the nickname the Swedish Beatles. With Benny's arrival, their sound matured almost overnight. The group began topping Swedish charts with hits like Sunny Girl and Wedding, songs that Benny had written himself. These early successes not only revealed his extraordinary gift for memorable melody but also sharpened his skills in studio arrangement and live performance. He quickly became the band's musical brain while quietly developing a deep understanding of both the commercial and technical dimensions of the music industry. Then came a pivotal evening in 1966 that would quietly change everything. Benny met Björn Ulvaeus while both were performing at a mutual friend's party. Björn, a member of the folk-pop group the Hootenanny Singers, shared Benny's deep love of harmony, arrangement, and musical detail. Their jam session that night sparked an instant creative partnership. Over the years that followed, they began writing together, experimenting with different styles and structures, and composing songs for other Swedish artists. Their collaborative bond deepened steadily, not just because of mutual respect, but because they balanced each other so perfectly. Benny was the emotional composer, Björn the witty and perceptive lyricist. By the early 1970s, the two men were not only creative partners but also romantically linked to two fellow musicians, Agnetha Faltskog, a chart-topping Swedish solo artist with a hauntingly beautiful soprano voice, and Anni-Frid Frida Lyngstad, a jazz-turned-pop singer blessed with a rich and powerful alto. Their joint musical venture took form under the lengthy and somewhat awkward name Björn and Benny, Agnetha and Anni-Frid. The name was clumsy, but the chemistry between them was electric. They tried and failed to win the Swedish selection for Eurovision in 1973, but returned the following year with Waterloo, a glam pop anthem that triumphed at the 1974 Eurovision Song Contest and instantly made them international stars. Shortly afterward, they adopted a far more memorable name, ABBA, an acronym drawn from the first letters of their names. From that moment on, Benny was no longer simply a pop musician. He was a sonic architect. He treated each song like a carefully constructed painting, layering instruments with intention, arranging vocal harmonies with surgical precision, and experimenting with synthesizers long before it was fashionable to do so. In the studio, he was known for his extraordinary patience and perfectionism, sometimes spending days reworking a single harmony until it felt emotionally right. He wasn't interested in what was merely popular. He was interested in what was timeless. Even as Agnetha and Frida dazzled audiences in their iconic matching jumpsuits, and Björn penned clever and bittersweet lyrics, it was Benny who quietly sculpted the emotional subtext beneath every song. His signature style blended brightness with depth, a characteristically Swedish melancholia carefully masked within joyful melody. Songs like Knowing Me, Knowing You and Fernando carried this duality, joy shimmering on the surface, sadness stirring quietly underneath. That was Benny's true gift, not just to pop music, but to generations of listeners who felt something inexplicably deeper in ABBA's seemingly simple songs. For most of the 1970s, ABBA rode an unstoppable wave of global fame. But as the band soared publicly, it began to erode privately. The unraveling was not sudden or dramatic. It was subtle and slow, like a house weathered gradually by time rather than destroyed in an instant by fire. The first visible crack appeared in 1979 when Bjorn and Agnetha divorced. It was a deeply personal rupture, but one the band attempted to manage professionally. At the time, they were working on the album Super Trooper, and though the songs retained their signature polish, the recording sessions began to carry a new and unmistakable heaviness. 2 years later, Benny and Frida followed the same painful path. Their relationship had once been described as fiery and beautifully symbiotic, a true musical love story. They had met in 1969, long before ABBA existed, and built a profound connection through sound before anything else. Frida once said in a 1975 interview that Benny understood her in a way no one else did. But understanding someone in the studio did not always translate into emotional availability at home. Benny's obsessive perfectionism, the very quality that made him brilliant as a musician, left precious little room for the kind of open emotional presence that a relationship demands. Frida, expressive and deeply feeling, began to sense the growing distance. By 1981, Benny admitted that he had fallen in love with Mona Norcliffe, a television producer he had met during a broadcast special. He told Frida the truth, but the damage was irreparable. The split was quiet and handled with professionalism, but it carved a deep scar into the band's already fragile dynamic. ABBA's next and final studio album, The Visitors, released that same year, reflected the emotional frost that had settled over the group. Songs like When All Is Said and Done and Slipping Through My Fingers dripped with unspoken pain and quiet resignation. The sparkle that had once defined them was visibly fading, and though the band would continue for another year, something vital had already disappeared long before any official announcement was made. For over 40 years, the story of ABBA's end was defined not by explosive headlines but by a deafening silence. Unlike most legendary bands that conclude with a farewell tour, a formal press conference, or some final cathartic performance, ABBA simply vanished. Their last official single, Under Attack, was released in December 1982. It failed to make the impact of their earlier work. There was no follow-up album, no world tour, no curtain call, just a gradual fade into the mist of speculation and fan theories that would stretch across decades. Their absence created an enormous void, and into that void came endless questions. Why did they stop when they were still so successful? Was it money, personal drama, or creative conflict? For years, none of the band members gave a definitive answer. The word hiatus floated around. Their public appearances became increasingly rare and cautiously polite. In many ways, ABBA became a myth frozen in time, the perfect pop group that had simply ceased to exist without explanation. That changed in November 2024. Benny Andersson, long known for his quiet introspection and careful avoidance of personal publicity, sat down for an interview with The Guardian. He arrived without a rehearsed narrative, without a publicist-crafted statement or airbrushed PR spin. Instead, Benny did something rare and genuinely courageous. He told the truth plainly. We were exhausted, he admitted. Marriages were falling apart. The music was starting to sound unnatural. We needed to stop to preserve ourselves. That simple, unsentimental statement landed harder than any scandal ever could. In just a few words, Benny confirmed what many longtime fans had long suspected. The breakup had not come from betrayal or artistic feuding. It had come from emotional depletion. After years of performing, recording, and maintaining the public illusion of joy while their personal lives collapsed behind the scenes, the group was drained, not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly and fatally. Then, in April 2025, Benny gave a follow-up interview to Billboard, offering even deeper insight. He described the band's final 2 years, 1981 and 1982, as uninspired workdays. What had once been vibrant and joyful collaboration had slowly turned into routine obligation. He and Bjorn were still writing, but without the same energy or sense of purpose. The songs came more slowly. Studio sessions grew shorter. Everything had begun to feel like a job rather than a passion. Even more telling was how Benny chose to frame the group's decision to stop. He did not call it a failure. He did not romanticize it. He described it simply as an inevitable unraveling. It wasn't sustainable anymore, he said. We couldn't go on pretending, not to each other, not to ourselves. This acknowledgement was not just illuminating. For millions of fans, it was healing. Songs from the Visitors, One of Us, Like an Angel Passing Through My Room, The Day Before You Came, had never simply sounded sad. They were sad. There had always been a heaviness in the lyrics and arrangements that betrayed something far deeper than mere pop trends. Listeners had felt it for decades, even when they could not quite name what it was. Benny's confession validated that feeling entirely. The ache, the sense of something quietly unraveling beneath a polished surface, was never just a projection. It was real. What is perhaps most striking is that none of Benny's revelations carried bitterness. He placed no blame on Bjorn, Agnetha, or Frida. Instead, he spoke of the band's end the way one might describe a natural conclusion, like a beautiful machine that had simply run its course. We had done what we could do, he said. There was nothing left in us to give it honestly. For fans, it was the closure they never knew they needed. After ABBA's quiet dissolution, Frida embarked on a deeply personal journey that no one had quite anticipated. In 1992, she married Prince Heinrich Rutzow-Roos of Plauen, becoming a member of European royalty. But life as a princess was far from the fairy tale it appeared. Frida struggled with the rigid expectations of aristocratic life. The spontaneity and emotional freedom that had defined her as a performer simply did not fit into the structured world she now inhabited. And then came the most devastating blow of her life. In 1998, her daughter Anneliese lost her life in a car accident in New York. She was just 30 years old. The loss was catastrophic. The woman who had once sung to millions now sought silence, grief-stricken in her secluded home near Lake Geneva, where the glitz of royalty and the brightness of past fame paled entirely against the emptiness left behind.